Hare Krishna. Welcome back to the live studios here in Sri Radha Lane, ISKCON of Houston, Texas, right next to Sri Radha Nilamadava's beautiful mandir, filled with wonderful Vaishnavas serving them. Hare Krishna. Hare Bol. Okay. We're going deeper into the first canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam today. Welcome to all of you out there in cyberspace, wherever you are. We hope you're having a good day. And first let's hear from the Srimad-Bhagavatam, Bhagavatam Mahima Stotra by Sanatana Goswami. Wonderful meditation on the Bhagavatam by Sanatana Goswami. Goes like this. Sarva Shastrabdipi Yusha Sarva Vedaika Satpala Sarva Siddhanta Ratnadya Sarva Lokaika Drikprada. O nectar from the ocean of all scriptures, singular fruit of all the Vedas, rich mine of the precious gems of all conclusive truths, you are the only giver of sight to all the worlds. Sarva Bhagavata Prana Srimad Bhagavata Prabho Kalidvandoditaditya Shri Krishna Parivartita. O life air of all the Supreme Lord's devotees, O Master Srimad Bhagavatam, you are the sun risen in the darkness of Kali. You are the exact image of Shri Krishna. Paramananda Pataya Prema Varshaksharayate Sarvada Sevasevyaya Shri Krishnaya Namostume. I bow down to you, who are supremely blissful to read. Your every syllable pours down a flood of prema. You can always be served by everyone. You are Shri Krishna himself. Marika Bando Matsangin Madguru Mad Mahadana Mandistadaga Mad Bhagya Madananda Namostute. My only friend, my constant companion, my spiritual master, my great wealth, my savior, my good fortune, my source of ecstasy, I bow down to you. Asadu Saduta Dayin Atini Chotata Kara Hanamunchagadachin Mam Premna Rit Kantayospura. O bestower of saintliness to the unsaintly, O exalter of the most fallen, please never leave me. Always appear in my heart and my voice with pure love. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Did you type in the right numbers? Thank you. Okay. We've been hearing some wonderful instructions in how to live a human life and be eligible for spiritual elevation. And we've heard the teachings of Vidura to Dhrtararastra, who was in a very awkward situation, and he told him the naked truth about material existence. Always good to hear the naked truth. And then Yudhishthira Maharaj. Now, here we are. When Yudhishthira Maharaj came to find Dhrtararastra and Vidura and Gandhari, they had gone because Vidura had convinced Dhrtararastra to give up this degraded position he was in, taking charity from the very people he tried to kill. And so now Yudhishthira came and he couldn't find them, and he felt very bad, even though they were trying to prevent him from accepting the proper heritage, his heritage, the throne, the sovereignty of the earth. And even though Dhrtararastra had, intrigued with his sons and others to kill the Pandavas, and still Yudhishthira didn't take him as an enemy. He took him as a senior and superior person, and therefore he was taking care of him exactly like he was still the king. So this is magnanimity of a pure Vaishnava. So now they came looking for them, and they asked Sanjaya, because Sanjaya is the personal secretary of Dhrtararastra, and they wouldn't make a move without letting him know. And he said, they cheated me also. Sometimes great souls cheat great souls for a higher purpose. We heard about this. Okay. So now, who's speaking? Is it Sanjaya? We're on 38, right? 48. Who's speaking? Hey, Sarva, who's speaking? You remember? Anyway. I'm a little bit...
Narada?
I'm taking... What? Narada. Yes. Then Narada shows up, because no one knew what had happened to them. Very good. Thank you very much. Yes. Even Sanjay didn't know. So then Narada showed up and explained everything, what happened. And now it's Narada instructing Yudhishthira, trying to pacify his heart. And that's what the Bhagavatam's about. It's one situation after another, after another, after another, of great souls teaching other great souls how to pacify their hearts in the face of material existence. Because even these are the greatest personalities in the history of the universe, and still they go through so many things. So we have to learn how to pacify our hearts. And this is how we pacify our hearts, by hearing the Srimad-Bhagavatam and learning how to follow in the footsteps of these great souls. Okay. We're on text 48. Therefore, O King, you should look to the Supreme Lord only, who is one without a second, and who manifests himself by different energies, and is both within and without. Purport. The Supreme Lord Personality of Godhead is one without a second, but he manifests himself by different energies, because he is by nature blissful. The living beings are also manifestations of his marginal energy, qualitatively one with the Lord, and there are innumerable living beings, both within and without the external and internal energies of the Lord. Since the spiritual world is a manifestation of the Lord's internal energy, the living beings within that internal potency are qualitatively one with the Lord, without contamination from the external potency. Although qualitatively one with the Lord, the living being, due to contamination of the material world, is pervertedly manifested, and therefore he experiences so-called happiness and distress in the material world. Such experiences are all ephemeral and do not affect the spirit soul. The perception of such ephemeral happiness and distress is due only to forgetfulness of his qualities, which are equal to the Lord's. There is, however, a regular current from the Lord himself and from within and without, by which to rectify the fallen condition of the living being. From within, he corrects the desiring living beings as localized Paramatma, and from without he corrects by his manifestations of the spiritual master and the revealed scriptures. One should look unto the Lord. One should not be disturbed by the so-called manifestations of happiness or distress, but he should try to cooperate with the Lord in his outward activities for correcting the fallen souls. By his order only, one should become a spiritual master and cooperate with the Lord. One should not become a spiritual master for one's personal benefit, for some material gain, or as an avenue of business or occupation for earning a livelihood. Bona fide spiritual masters who look unto the Supreme Lord to cooperate with him are actually qualitatively one with the Lord, and the forgetful ones are perverted reflections only. Yudhishthira Maharaj is advised by Narada, therefore, not to be disturbed by the affairs of so-called happiness and distress, but to look only unto the Lord to execute the mission for which the Lord has descended. That was his prime duty. Text 49. That Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, in the guise of all-devouring time, Kala Rupa, has now descended on earth to eliminate the envious from the world. Purport. There are two classes of human beings, namely the envious and the obedient. Since the Supreme Lord is one and the Father of all living beings, the envious living beings are also his sons, but they are known as the asuras. But the living beings who are obedient to the Supreme Father are called devatas, or demigods, because they are not contaminated by the material conception of life. Not only are the asuras envious of the Lord, and even denying the existence of the Lord, but they are also envious of all other living beings. The predominance of asuras in the world is occasionally rectified by the Lord when he eliminates them from the world and establishes a rule of devatas, like the Pandavas. His designation as Kala in disguise is significant. He is not at all dangerous, but he is the transcendent form of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. For the devotees, his factual form is disclosed, and for the non-devotees, he appears like Kalarupa, which is causal form. This causal form of the Lord is not at all pleasing to the asuras, and therefore they think of the Lord as formless in order to feel secure that they will not be vanquished by the Lord. Text 50. The Lord has already performed his duties to help the demigods, and he is awaiting the rest. You Pandavas may wait as long as the Lord is here on earth. Purport. The Lord descends from his abode, Krishna Loka, the topmost planet in the spiritual sky, in order to help the demigod administrators of this material world when they are greatly vexed by the asuras, who are envious not only of the Lord, but also of his devotees. As referred to above, the conditioned living beings contact material association by their own choice, dictated by a strong desire to lord it over the resources of the material world and become imitation lords of all they survey. Everyone is trying to become an imitation god. There is keen competition among such imitation gods, and such competitors are generally known as asuras. When there are too many asuras in the world, then it becomes hell for those who are devotees of the Lord. Due to the growth of the asuras, the mass of people who are generally devoted to the Lord by nature, and the pure devotees of the Lord, including the demigods in higher planets, pray to the Lord for relief. And the Lord either descends personally from his abode or deputes some of his devotees to remodel the fallen condition of human society, or even animal society. Such disruptions take place not only in human society, but also among animals, birds, and other living beings, including the demigods and the higher planets. Lord Sri Krishna descended personally to vanquish asuras like Kamsa, Jarasandha, and Shishupala, and during the reign of Maharaj Yudhishthira, almost all these asuras were killed by the Lord. Now he was awaiting the annihilation of his own dynasty, called the Yaduvangsha, and who appeared by his will in this world. He wanted to take them away before his own departure to his eternal abode. Narada, like Vidura, did not disclose the imminent annihilation of the Yadu dynasty, but indirectly gave a hint to the king and his brothers to wait until the incident happened and the Lord departed. Text 51. O king, your uncle Dhrtararastra, his brother Vidura, and his wife Gandhari have gone to the southern side of the Himalaya mountains, where there are shelters of the great sages. Purport. To pacify the mourning Maharaj Yudhishthira, Narada first of all spoke from the philosophical point of view, and then he began to describe the future movements of his uncle, which he could see by his foreseeing powers, and thus began to describe as follows. Text 52. The place is called Saptarota, divided by 7, because there the waters of the sacred Ganges were divided into 7 branches. This was done for the satisfaction of the 7 great rishis. Text 53. On the banks of the Saptarota, Dhrtararastra is now engaged in beginning Ashtanga Yoga by bathing 3 times daily, in the morning, noon, and evening, by performing the Agnihotra sacrifice with fire, and by drinking only water. This helps one control the mind and the senses and frees one completely from thoughts of familial affection. Purport. The yoga system is a mechanical way to control the senses and mind and the mind and divert them from matter to spirit. The preliminary processes are the sitting posture, meditation, spiritual thoughts, manipulation of air passing through within the body, and gradual situation in trance, facing the absolute person, Paramatma. Such mechanical ways of rising to the spiritual platform prescribe some regulative principles of taking bath daily 3 times, fasting as far as possible, sitting and concentrating the mind on spiritual matters, and thus gradually becoming free from vishaya, or material objectives. Material existence means to be absorbed in the material objective, which is simply illusory. House, country, family, society, children, property, and businesses are some of the material coverings of the spirit, Atma, and the yoga system helps one to become free from all these illusory thoughts and gradually turn towards the absolute person, Paramatma. By material association and education, we learn simply to concentrate on flimsy things. But yoga is the process of forgetting them altogether. Modern so-called yogis and yoga systems manifest some magical feats, and ignorant persons who are attracted by such false things, ignorant persons are attracted by such false things, or they accept the yoga system as a cheap healing process for diseases of the gross body. But factually, the yoga system is the process of learning to forget what we have acquired through the struggle for existence. Dhrtararashtra was all along engaged in improving family affairs by raising the standard of living of his sons, or by usurping the property of the Pandavas for the sake of his own sons. These are common affairs for a man grossly materialistic and without knowledge of the spiritual force. He does not see how this can drag one from heaven to hell. But by the grace of his younger brother Vidura, Dhrtararashtra was enlightened and could see his grossly illusory engagements and by such enlightenment he was able to leave home for spiritual realization. Sri Narada Dev was just foretelling the way of his spiritual progress in a place which was sanctified by the flow of the celestial Ganges. Drinking water only, without solid food, is also considered fasting. This is necessary for advancement in spiritual knowledge. A foolish man wants to be a cheap yogi without observing the regulative principles. A man who has no control over the tongue at first can hardly become a yogi. Yogi and bogi are two opposite terms. The bogi, or the merry man who eats and drinks, cannot be a yogi, for a yogi is never allowed to eat and drink unrestrictedly. We may note with profit how Dhrtararastra began his yoga system by drinking water only and sitting calmly in a place with a spiritual atmosphere, deeply absorbed in the thoughts of the Lord Hari, the personality of Godhead. Text 54. One who has controlled the sitting postures, the yogic asanas, and the breathing process can turn the senses toward the absolute personality of Godhead and thus become immune to the contaminations of the modes of material nature, namely mundane goodness, passion, and ignorance. Purport. The preliminary activities of the way of yoga are asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dhyana, dharana, etc. Maharaj Dhrtararastra was to attain success in those preliminary actions because he was seated in a sanctified place and was concentrating upon one objective, namely the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari. Thus all his senses were being engaged in the service of the Lord. This process directly helps the devotee to get freedom from the contaminations of the three material modes of nature. Even the highest mode, the material mode of goodness, is also a cause of material bondage, and what to speak of the other qualities, namely passion and ignorance. Passion and ignorance increase the material propensities of hankering for material enjoyment, and a strong sense of lust provokes the accumulation of wealth and power. One who has conquered these two base mentalities and has raised himself to the platform of goodness, which is full of knowledge and morality, cannot also control the senses, namely the eyes, the tongue, the nose, the ear, and the touch. But one who has surrendered himself unto the lotus feet of Lord Hari, as above mentioned, can transcend all influences of the modes of material nature and be fixed in the service of the Lord. The Bhakti Yoga process, therefore, directly applies the senses to the loving service of the Lord. This prohibits the performer from engaging in material activities. This process of turning the senses from material attachment to the loving transcendental service of the Lord is called pratyahara, and the very process is called pranayama, ultimately ending in samadhi, or absorption in pleasing the Supreme Lord Hari by all means. Text 55. Dhrtararastra will have to amalgamate his pure identity with intelligence and then merge into the Supreme Being with knowledge of his qualitative oneness as a living entity with the Supreme Brahman. Being freed from the blocked sky, he will have to rise to the spiritual sky. Very interesting. Being freed from the blocked sky. So I just had, the day before yesterday, my nerves to this part of my body blocked. That's what they call it. They call it nerves. They block the nerves completely, and it's like it didn't exist. Now it's working, and I can feel it, and it's painful. But anyway, before there was nothing, and it would flop around. If I didn't hold it, when I moved, it would just go whoop, 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 and banged into something. I didn't even notice it because I couldn't feel it. So here it says, being freed from the blocked sky, he will have to rise to the spiritual sky. So even when you get blocked from this body, then you have to go to the spiritual body. Otherwise, it's just you're living in a bunch of matter. Purport. The living being, by his desiring to lord it over the material world and declining to cooperate with the Supreme Lord, contacts the sum total of the material world, namely the Mahatattva. And from the Mahatattva, his false identity with the material world, intelligence, mind, and senses, is developed. This covers his pure spiritual identity. By the yogic process, when his pure identity is realized in self-realization, one has to revert to the original position of amalgamating the 5 gross elements and the subtle elements, mind and intelligence, into the Mahatattva again, thus getting freed from the clutches of the Mahatattva. He has to merge in the existence of the Supersoul. In other words, he has to realize that qualitatively he is non-different from the Supersoul, and thus he transcends the material sky by his pure spiritual intelligence, and thus becomes engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. This is the highest perfectional development of spiritual identity, which was attained by Dhrtararastra by the grace of Vidura and the Lord. The Lord's mercy was bestowed upon him by his personal contact with Vidura, and when he was actually practicing the instructions of Vidura, the Lord helped him to attain the highest perfectional stage. A pure devotee of the Lord does not live on any planet of the material sky, nor does he feel any contact with material elements. His so-called material body does not exist, being surcharged with the spiritual current of the Lord's identical interest. And thus he is permanently freed from all contaminations of the sum total of Mahatattva. He is always in the spiritual sky, which he attains by being transcendental to the 7-fold material coverings by the effect of his devotional service. The conditioned souls are within the coverings, whereas the liberated soul is far beyond the coverings. So what he's doing is, he's actually reversing the process of creation. You remember? Well, we haven't heard about it yet, so maybe some of you wouldn't be able to remember. But there's a process of creation where sound, transcendental sound, transforms into the sky, and the sky transforms into air and the sense of touch, like that. And all of the sense objects and the senses are created one after the other from subtle to gross. So this yogic process is no joke. That means you have to actually reverse the process by your spiritual intelligence. And that's how you go back to the spiritual world, by the mechanical process. And it's why that process is not recommended for this age, because we're not very qualified to do something like that. We can't even imagine doing something like that. But by chanting the holy names of the Lord under the direction of personalities on the level of Vidura, we learn how to do it in a way that's practical for us by chanting Hare Krishna and taking prasadam and teaching others about devotional service and hearing the Srimad-Bhagavatam together. Okay, 56. He will have to suspend all the actions of the senses, even from the outside, and will have to be impervious to the interactions of the senses, which are influenced by the modes of material nature. After renouncing all material duties, he must become immovably established beyond all sources of hindrances on the path. Purport. Dhrtararastra had attained by the yogic process the stage of negation of all sorts of material reaction. The effects of the material modes of nature draw the victim to indefatigable desires of enjoying matter, but one can escape such false enjoyment by the yogic process. Every sense is always busy in searching for its food, and thus the conditioned soul is assaulted from all sides and has no chance to become steady in any pursuit. Maharaj Yudhishthira was advised by Narada not to disturb his uncle by attempting to bring him back home. He was now beyond the attraction of anything material. The material modes of nature, the gunas, have their different modes of activities, but above the material modes of nature is a spiritual mode, which is absolute. Nirguna means without reaction. The spiritual mode and its effect are identical. Therefore, the spiritual quality is distinguished from its material counterpart by the word nirguna. After complete suspension of the material modes of nature, one is admitted to the spiritual sphere. An action dictated by the spiritual modes is called devotional service, or bhakti. Bhakti is therefore nirguna, attained by direct contact with the Absolute. Text 57. O king, he will quit his body, most probably on the 5th day from today. This is a little indication of how knowledgeable Narada is. Trikaladgi, he knows what's going to happen. And his body will turn to ashes. Purport. Narada Muni's prophecy prohibited Yudhishthira Maharaj from going to the place where his uncle was staying, because even after quitting the body by his own mystic power, Dhrtararastra would not be in need of any funeral ceremony. Narada Muni indicated that his body by itself would burn to ashes. The perfection of the yoga system is attained by such mystic power. The yogi is able to quit his body by his own choice of time and can attain any planet he desires by turning the present body into ashes by self-made fire. Text 58. While outside observing her husband, who will burn in the fire of mystic power along with his thatched cottage, his chaste wife will enter the fire with rapt attention. Purport. Gandhari was an ideal chaste lady, a life companion of her husband, and therefore when she saw her husband burning in the fire of mystic yoga, along with his cottage of leaves, she despaired. She left home after losing her 100 sons, and in the forest she saw that her most beloved husband was also burning. Now she actually felt alone, and therefore she entered the fire of her husband and followed her husband to death. This entering of a chaste lady into the fire of her dead husband is called the sati rite, and the action is considered to be most perfect for a woman. In a later age, this sati rite became an obnoxious, criminal affair, because the ceremony was forced upon even an unwilling woman. In this fallen age, it is not possible for any lady to follow the sati rite as chastely as it was done by Gandhari and others in past ages. A chaste wife, like Gandhari, would feel the separation of her husband to be more burning than actual fire. Such a lady can observe the sati rite voluntarily, and there is no criminal force by anyone. When the rite became a formality only, and force was applied upon a lady to follow the principle, actually it became criminal, and therefore the ceremony was stopped by state law. This prophecy by Narada Muni to Maharaj Yudhishthira forbade him to go to his widowed aunt. Text 59. Vidura, being affected with delight and grief, will then leave that place of sacred pilgrimage. Purport. Vidura was astonished to see the marvelous departure of his brother Dhrtararastra as a liberated yogi, for in his past life he was much attached to materialism. Of course, it was only due to Vidura that his brother attained the desired goal of life. Vidura was therefore glad to learn about it, but he was sorry that he could not make his brother turn into a pure devotee. This was not done by Vidura because of Dhrtarastra's being inimical to the Pandavas, who were all devotees of the Lord. An offense at the feet of a Vaishnava is more dangerous than an offense at the lotus feet of the Lord. Vidura was certainly very liberal to bestow mercy upon his brother Dhrtarashtra, whose past life was very materialistic. But ultimately, the result of such mercy certainly depended on the will of the Supreme Lord in the present life. Therefore, Dhrtarashtra attained liberation only, and after many such liberated states of life, one can attain to the stage of devotional service. Vidura was certainly very mortified by the death of his brother and sister-in-law, and the only remedy to mitigate such lamentation was to go out to the pilgrimage. Thus Maharaj Yudhishthira had no chance to call back Vidura, his surviving uncle. Text 60. Having spoken thus, the great sage Narada, along with his Veena, ascended into outer space. Yudhishthira kept his instruction in his heart, and so was able to get rid of all lamentations. Purport. Sri Naradaji is an eternal spaceman. Having been endowed with a spiritual body, by the grace of the Lord, he can travel in the outer space of both material and spiritual worlds. Dr. Hare Krishna. Vindakshar. Sri Naradaji is an eternal spaceman. Having been endowed with a spiritual body by the grace of the Lord, he can travel in the outer spaces of both material and spiritual worlds. We're on text 60, purport of chapter 13 or 14? 13. Thank you. He can travel in the outer spaces of both the material and spiritual worlds without restriction, and can approach any planet in unlimited space within no time. We have already discussed his previous life as the son of a maidservant. Because of his association with pure devotees, he was elevated to the position of an eternal spaceman, and thus had freedom of movement. One should therefore try to follow in the footsteps of Narada Muni, and not make a futile effort to reach other planets by mechanical means. Maharaj Yudhishthira was a pious king, and therefore he could see Narada Muni occasionally. Anyone who desires to see Narada Muni must first be pious and follow in the footsteps of Narada Muni. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the first canto, 13th chapter of the Srimad-Bhagavatam, entitled Dhrtararastra Quits Home. Chapter 14. The disappearance of Lord Krishna. Sri Sutta Goswami said, Arjuna went to Dwaraka to see Lord Sri Krishna and other friends, and also to learn from the Lord of his next activities. Purport. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, the Lord descended on earth for the protection of the faithful and annihilation of the impious. So after the battle of Kurukshetra and establishment of Maharaj Yudhishthira, the mission of the Lord was complete. The Pandavas, especially Sri Arjuna, were eternal companions of the Lord, and therefore Arjuna went to Dwarka to hear from the Lord of his next program of work. Text 2. A few months passed, and Arjuna did not return. Maharaj Yudhishthira then began to observe some inauspicious omens, which were fearful in themselves. Purport. Lord Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is ad infinitum more powerful than the most powerful sun of our experience. Millions and billions of suns are created by Him and annihilated by Him within His one breathing period. In the material world, the sun is considered to be the source of all productivity and material energy, and only due to the sun can we have the necessities of life. Therefore, during the personal presence of the Lord on earth, all paraphernalia for our peace and prosperity, especially religion and knowledge, were in full display because of the Lord's presence, just as there is a full flood of light in the presence of the glowing sun. Maharaj Yudhishthira observed some discrepancies in his kingdom, and therefore he became anxious about Arjuna, who was long absent, and there was also no news about Dwarka's being a well-being. He suspected the disappearance of Lord Krishna, otherwise there would have been no possibility of fearful omens. He saw that the direction of eternal time had changed, and this was very fearful. There were disruptions in the seasonal regularities. The people in general had become very greedy, angry, and deceitful, and he saw that they were adopting foul means of livelihood. Purport. When civilization is disconnected from the loving relation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, symptoms like changes of seasonal regulations, foul means of livelihood, greed, anger, and fraudulence become rampant. The change of seasonal regulations refers to one season's atmosphere becoming manifest in another season. For example, the rainy seasons being transferred to autumn, or the fructification of fruits and flowers from one season to another season. A godless man is invariably greedy, angry, and fraudulent. Such a man can earn his livelihood by any means, black or white. During the reign of Maharaj Yudhishthira, all the above symptoms were conspicuous by their absence. But Maharaj Yudhishthira was astonished to experience even a slight change in the godly atmosphere of his kingdom, and at once he suspected the disappearance of the Lord. Foul means of livelihood implies deviation from one's occupational duty. There are prescribed duties for everyone, such as the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudra. But anyone who deviates from his prescribed duty and declares another's duty to be his own is following a foul and improper duty. A man becomes too greedy for wealth and power when he has no object of life, and when he thinks that this earthly life of a few years is all in all. Ignorance is the cause for all these anomalies in human society, and to remove this ignorance, especially in this age of degradation, the powerful sun is there to distribute light in the shape of Srimad-Bhagavatam. Text 4. All ordinary transactions and dealings become polluted with cheating, even between friends. And in familial affairs, there was always misunderstanding between fathers, mothers, and sons, between well-wishers, and between brothers. Even between husband and wife, there was always strain and quarrel. Purport. A conditioned living being is endowed with four principles of malpractice, namely errors, insanity, inability, and cheating. These are signs of imperfection, and out of the four, the the propensity to cheat others is most prominent. And this cheating practice is there in the conditioned souls because the conditioned souls are primarily in the material world, imbued with an unnatural desire to lord it over the material world. A living being in his pure state is not conditioned by the laws because in his pure state he is conscious that a living being is eternally subservient to the Supreme Being, and thus it is always good for him to remain subservient instead of falsely trying to lord it over the property of the Supreme Lord. In the conditioned state, the living being is not satisfied even if he actually becomes the lord of all that he surveys, which he never becomes. And therefore, he becomes the victim of all kinds of cheating, even with his nearest and most intimate relations. In such an unsatisfactory state of affairs, there is no harmony, even between father and sons, or between husband and wife, but all these contending difficulties can be mitigated by one process, and that is the devotional service of the Lord. The world of hypocrisy can be checked only by counteraction through devotional service to the Lord, and nothing else. Maharaj Yudhishthira, having observed the disparities, conjectured the disappearance of the Lord from the earth. Text 5. In course of time it came to pass that people in general became accustomed to greed, anger, pride, etc. Maharaj Yudhishthira, observing all these omens, spoke to his younger brother. Purport. Such a pious king as Maharaj Yudhishthira at once became perturbed when there were such inhuman symptoms as greed, anger, irreligiosity, and hypocrisy rampant in society. It appears from this statement that all these symptoms of degraded society were unknown to the public of the time, and it was astonishing for them to have experienced them with the advent of the Kali Yuga, or the age of coral. Text 6. Maharaj Yudhishthira said to his younger brother Bhimasena, I sent Arjuna to Dwarka to meet his friends and to learn from the personality of Godhead Krishna of his program of work. Text 7. Since he departed, 7 months have passed, yet he has not returned. I do not know factually how things are going there. Text 8. Is he going to quit his earthly pastimes, as Devarshi Narada indicated? Has that time already arrived? Purport. As we have discussed many times, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, has many plenary expansions, and each and every one of them, although equally powerful, executes different functions. In the Bhagavad Gita, there are different statements by the Lord, and each of these statements are meant for different planetary portions. And each of these statements is meant for different plenary portions, or portions of the plenary portions. For example, Sri Krishna, the Lord, says in Bhagavad Gita, whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practice, O descendant of Bharata, and a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I descend myself to deliver the faithful, to annihilate the miscreants, and to re-establish the principles of occupational duty. I appear in every age. If I should cease to work, then all humanity would be misdirected. I would also be the cause of creating unwanted population, and I would thereby destroy the peace of all sentient beings. Whatever action a great man performs, common men will follow, and whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. So that's the law of nature, and that's why people can follow strange people like Hitler and Stalin and Mao Zedong and Donald Trump. Sometimes you wonder, how the whole mass of people just get moved by such people who can't, with a straight face will lie through their teeth, again and again and again. The mothers are all teaching their children, don't tell lies. And this guy's just promoting it all over the world, and the kids are getting mistrained. Therefore it says here, whatever action a great man performs, common men will follow. That's the law of nature. And whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. All the above statements by the Lord apply to different plenary portions of the Lord, namely his expansions, such as Sankarsana, Vasudeva, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, and Narayana. These are all he himself in different transcendental expansions, and still the Lord, as Sri Krishna, functions in a different sphere of transcendental exchange with different grades of devotees. And yet Lord Krishna, as he appears once every 24 hours of Brahma's time, or after a lapse of 8,640,000,000 solar years, in each and every universe, and all his transcendental pastimes are displayed in each and every universe in a routine spool. But in that routine spool, the functions of Lord Krishna, Lord Vasudeva, etc., are complex problems for the layman. There is no difference between the Lord's self and the Lord's transcendental body. The expansions execute different activities. When the Lord, however, appears in his person as Lord Sri Krishna, his other plenary portions also join in him by his inconceivable potency, called Yogamaya. And thus Lord Krishna, the Lord Krishna of Vrindavan is different from the Lord Krishna of Mathura or the Lord Krishna of Dwarka. The Virat Rupa of Lord Krishna is also different from him by his inconceivable potency. The Virat Rupa exhibited on the battlefield of Kurukshetra is the material conception of his form. Therefore it should be understood that when Lord Krishna was apparently killed by the bow and arrow of the hunter, the Lord left his so-called material body in the material world. The Lord is Kaivalya, and for him there is no difference between matter and spirit, because everything is created from him. Therefore, his quitting one sort of body or accepting another body does not mean that he is like an ordinary living being. All such activities are simultaneously one and different by his inconceivable potency. When Maharaj Yudhishthira was lamenting the possibility of his disappearance, it was just in pursuance of a custom of lamenting the disappearance of a great friend. But factually, the Lord never quits his transcendental body, as is misconceived by less intelligent persons. Such less intelligent persons have been condemned by the Lord himself in Bhagavad Gita, and they are known as the Mudhas. That the Lord left his body means that he left again his plenary portions in the respective dhammas, transcendental abodes, as he left his Virata Rupa in the material world. Text 9. From him only, Hare Krishna Nidya, Haribol. From him only, all our kingly opulence, good wives, lives, progeny, control over our subjects, victory over our enemies, and future accommodations in higher planets have become possible. All this is due to his causeless mercy upon us. Purport. Material prosperity consists of a good wife, good home, sufficient land, good children, aristocratic family relations, victory over competitors, and, by pious work, attainment of accommodations in the higher celestial planets for better facilities of material amenities. These facilities are earned not by one's hard manual labor or by unfair means, but by the mercy of the Supreme Lord. Prosperity earned by one's personal endeavor also depends on the mercy of the Lord. Personal labor must be there in addition to the Lord's benediction, but without the Lord's benediction, no one is successful simply by personal labor. The modernized man of Kali Yuga believes in personal endeavor and denies the benediction of the Supreme Lord. Even a great sannyasi of India delivered speeches in Chicago protesting the benedictions of the Supreme Lord. But as far as Vedic Shastras are concerned, we find in the pages of Srimad-Bhagavatam the ultimate sanction for all success rests in the hands of the Supreme Lord. Maharaj Yudhishthira admits this truth in his personal success, and it behooves one to follow in the footsteps of a great king and devotee of the Lord to make life a full success. If one could achieve success without the sanction of the Lord, then no medical practitioner would fail to cure a patient. Despite the most advanced treatment of a suffering patient by the most up-to-date medical practitioner, there is death. And even in the most hopeless case, without medical treatment, a patient is cured astonishingly. Therefore, the conclusion is that God's sanction is the immediate cause for all happenings, good or bad. Any successful man should feel grateful to the Lord for all he has achieved. And we'll end our reading for tonight there. Hare Krishna. So, we've come to our favorite place, the reflections of what we've heard. Anything that stood out in your mind? Yes, Vedant Ishvara.
This last paragraph in which Prabhupada talks about a person can be healed.
This last paragraph where Prabhupada talks about a person can be healed.
Yeah. And so, do we understand that we should be thoroughly dependent on Krishna? Because Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that three things should be taken care of immediately: fire, death,
and disease.
So how do we understand this?
It means we depend on Krishna and we go to you. Because you are depending on the Ayurveda, and the Ayurveda is given by Krishna, and therefore everything's given by Krishna. This is the point they're making. Everything's given, but the point is the consciousness shouldn't be that we have done it. I mean, what can I say? I haven't had anything like this happen to me before, but I'm watching this. I'm feeling the thing healing. It's amazing. It was completely smashed, and it's healing. It was big, dark, all the way to the end, and I took the thing off before they, did the operation, and the swelling had gone down, and there were big, dark streaks, but still it looked much, much more normal, and the healing process is there. So we have to depend on, that doesn't mean we don't go to a doctor if we're sick. But we have to know that those healing potencies are coming from the Lord. And therefore, and this pastime is trying to teach us this, even when it doesn't work out, we don't lose faith in the Lord. We don't chastise the Lord and feel bad, because we know this is something's in it for me. There's something positive in it for me when things seem to go, against some reversal in life. There's some reason for it. There's always a reason for it. And if we dig deep enough into the Bhagavatam, we will find all the reasons. So the material world, as the personified Vedas speak in the 87th chapter of the 10th canto of the Srimad-Bhagavatam, is actually created with two potencies, for two purposes, so that we can actually enjoy a false sense of proprietorship and ownership and all these things, and at the same time become rectified. It's created in such a way as we can't actually get the ultimate solution to our problems. But there is an ultimate solution, and that's what it means to depend on Krishna. I mean, ultimately, like you said, and we were saying, that the Ayurveda is given by Krishna. Dhanvantari came into the world with the pot of nectar and the leech in his other hand, and the Ayurveda came with him. So everything has a purpose, everything has a use, everything has utility if it's done according to the laws of God in the Vedas. So therefore it's not that we should purposefully, neglect ourselves and die. This is a very intense pastime here. Dhrtararastra is being purified from some very heavy offenses, very heavy offenses against the personality of God himself and some of the most elevated devotees, his eternal associates, and so he needs a heavy dose. So this is actually our duty. As devotees, this is our duty. To learn this knowledge, to apply it in our heart, in our lives, and to teach it to others. That is our duty. Yes, Hannah?
To expand on that, the quote from the Bhagavad Gita, 3:21 says, "Whatever action a great man performs, common men will follow. And whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues." Prabhupada did this for us, and we change our hearts, and then by giving people Prabhupada's books and seeing our example, it's a cycle. It goes on.
I'm taking notes. I'm taking notes. You're going to distribute a lot of Prabhupada's books. We're going to help organize it.
It reminds me of the quote that says,
we're going to make an enclave within this community we have here. We're making an enclave, a new enclave. Yes, and there's going to be more of these activities going on and more new people in the enclave. It's going to grow, guaranteed.
Be the change you wish to see in the world.
Yes.
And by reading these, changes our hearts and purifies us. And seeing Prabhupada's example changes my heart, so I know it changes everyone else. Seeing your example changes my heart, changes everyone else. So, Kali Yuga is so bad with Krishna.
Okay, that was about the nicest realization we've heard since we've been here. Fantastic. All right, everybody's watching and everybody's taking notes. The day's going to come when you're going to get your new name, and then lots of things are going to happen around here. Hare Krishna. Yes.
So, this text 8 says the Lord, when the Lord left his body, means that he left again his plenary portion in the respective dance, transcendental abodes, as he left his Virat root in the material world.
Yes, it means that he put on a show. It was a dramatic performance. He is the supreme magician. And just like a magician on the stage can somehow or other make a spell or illusion by the way they do things, sleight of hand and all these things, to make it appear like, something's happening that's not actually happening. They have a box, they put the person in there, they cut it, in half, and this person's still there. There's a trick they do this. There's a whole trick they do this, when the saw doesn't actually cut the body. But that's what it looks like. So the Lord is the supreme magician. So imagine the things that Krishna did. Imagine the things that he did. He was never touched by any inauspiciousness, ever. When we hear the 10th canto, we'll hear about all his pastimes. To think that a little, arrow touching his toe is going to make him leave his body, is just ludicrous. It's not true at all. So therefore it says there, just as the Lord, becomes the universal form, not that he loses his own shape in his own form, but by the transformation of his energy, the material world comes into existence and appears to be separate from him and so many things. So he left a body that appeared to be like that, but it wasn't. It wasn't. It was his show. It was his projection. The great mystic yogis can project a form or a situation, and a person can get, like when Dhruva Maharaj was fighting the Yakshas, and there were all kinds of inauspicious things falling from the sky, and it was all being conjured. Shalva, he had this ability to conjure. He was a sorcerer, and he had the ability to conjure things. So they get those abilities from just a little tiny drop of Krishna's mystic powers. So that's what it means. It means the body that he appeared to leave was just made of the material elements. It wasn't him. It wasn't him. And it's not that he left his body like the way we leave our body. He already proved that he wasn't the body. That he always proved that he was his body, rather. That he was the same as his body. He proved it many, many times. So that's the way to understand this pastime. And therefore, all the devotees, they feel lamentation when they think about Krishna leaving. They also feel ecstasy, because Krishna has a plan and he's enacting his plan, and we're all in a part of that plan, and ultimately it's our duty to want to go back to him, spiritual world. So the purpose of it, of him doing that, is to give the demons evidence to prove that he wasn't God. That's his inconceivable potency. He does things in a way that will prove that he's not the body, and that he's the supreme being, and he'll do something else to give evidence to the non-devotees, to give them something to argue about, something to say.
Why give that to them?
Because they want it. Just like a father will sometimes give something to a child that he knows isn't good for him, because why? The child's laying on the floor and banging his hands and feet on the floor and crying. No, you have to give it. Prabhupada used his own self as an example. He wanted father gave him a toy gun, and he wanted another one for the other hand. Prabhupada, he was like that from the very beginning of his life. He wanted that Rath car, and he wouldn't take anything else. And then when a lady just walked by and happened to say, "Oh, I have one of those." And meanwhile, the father was going crazy, thinking how he's going to get one of these Rath carts, little miniature Rath carts. The Prabhupada was always like that. He always got his way. So what to speak of Krishna? Okay? All right, I'm going to stop here. I need to take extra rest. I have doctor's orders. Trying to be a good patient. Hare Krishna. Srimad-Bhagavatam ki jai. Thank you, all of you out there in cyberspace. Please share, care, and care. Haribol. All glories to Prabhupada.